Welcome back to the Farm Show here on Westplex Talk 1045 for October 25th, 2025. Something wicked this way comes. It's Southern Rust. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But first, a couple news items and events from the University of Missouri. The first one is for ladies only. Gentlemen, you can listen and you can hear what the topic is, but you can't attend this event. Here's what the folks from the University of Missouri have to say. Learn to save the cuss words. Secure your load at Pearls of Production. Women in Agriculture event is November 8th in Columbia. This story was written by Linda Geist at the University of Missouri. Here's what Linda writes. There are times on the farm when shucky darn just isn't enough. University of Missouri Extension specialists will show women in agriculture how to hone their shop skills at the, quote, Save the Cuss Words 2.0. You got this, end quote, during the in-person session of the annual Pearls of Production Women in Agriculture Conference on November 8th in Columbia. Heather Conroe is the MUExtension livestock specialist, and Heather says, we are hoping to meet farm women who want to learn hands-on techniques, network with other women, and make connections that last the entire year until the next conference when we can do it all over again. And Heather is a statewide poultry specialist and also the Pearls of Production committee chair. A session called Shop Talk focuses on how to perform routine tasks on the farm. MUExtension assistant professor Karen Funkenbush and livestock specialist Brenda Schreck will teach skills that come in handy on the farm. By learning technical skills, women can, quote, deal with those days when the hot wire isn't hot, but the bull is, and has his head stuck in the gate, says Funkenbush. Heather Conroe says, you may have the whole day planned out and too many things to do. That's when all HE double hockey sticks breaks loose. The cows are in the road, the trailer tire is flat, and kid number 2 forgot his ball uniform. You just want to go back to the house and crawl under the covers. We're here to help you navigate those days. Funkenbush and Schreck will also teach attendees how to make do with what they have on hand. They will show you how to secure your load, how to replace a chain on a chainsaw, and more. Quote, you just can't go running into town every time something needs fixed, says Brenda Schreck. Funkenbush says all activities will be taught with farm safety and ergonomics for women in mind. Funkenbush says, Pearls of Production empowers farm women by giving them the knowledge, skills, and confidence to contribute to Missouri agriculture. Other sessions on November 8th will cover swine and beef topics, small ruminant management, heroes to hives beekeeping, and, quote, stop the bleed, end quote, emergency management. For more information, you can contact Heather Conroe at hconroe, C-O-N-R-O-W, at missouri.edu. Again, that event will take place on November 8th in Columbia. And a second event from the folks at MUExtension takes place November 14th in Auxvasse. The University of Missouri Extension will offer training on, quote, opportunities for drones in agriculture, end quote, November 14th at the Auxvasse Lions Club Park. Auxvasse is about an hour 15 minutes away, depending on how close you are to Highway 70. On November 14th, the event runs 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and will provide farmers, agribusiness professionals, and entrepreneurs an in-depth look at how drones are transforming agricultural operations across Missouri. That's according to Chrissy Brandel, MUExtension field specialist in livestock. During the hands-on workshop, participants will learn about different types of drones, Federal Aviation Administration requirements, remote pilot certifications, and practical business applications for aerial imaging, spraying, and spreading. Field exercises will give attendees hands-on experience in manual flight, autonomous mission planning, and using drones in real-world farm settings, Brandel said. Brandel goes on to say, drones are revolutionizing how producers monitor crops, manage resources, and make decisions on the farm. This program gives producers the opportunity to see how drones can bring efficiency, precision, and profitability to their operations. We want to help farmers understand not only the technology itself, but also how to integrate it in a way that fits their individual production systems. For more information, you can contact Chrissy Brandel at the MUExtension Center in Callaway County. You can email her at Chrissy, and that is spelled uniquely, CHRISEE, and then her last name, Brandel, BRANDL. That's Chrissy Brandel at Missouri.edu. Again, that event is November 14th at the Auxvasse Lions Club Park, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Now, just a few minutes ago, I mentioned southern rust, and southern rust was the topic of a bulletin put out last week by the folks at MUExtension. Here's the headline. Southern rust can affect nutrient value of winter feed. Milk production may be sensitive to changes. Here's what the folks from MUExtension have to say. Southern rust, a fungal disease, can reduce nutrients and lower digestibility in infected corn fed to livestock, says University of Missouri Extension field agronomist Nick Westlack. Early dry down caused by southern rust can cause problems with proper silage packing, which increases risk of poor fermentation and higher mold and yeast populations. Corn infected with southern rust may be more of a concern for the dairy industry than the beef industry, says Eric Bailey, MUExtension State Beef Nutrition Specialist. The dairy industry relies heavily on corn silage, and milk production is highly sensitive to subtle changes in nutritive value. I think everyone who's ever watched Napoleon Dynamite knows that. MU notes that this could lead to other diseases. While southern rust does not produce known mycotoxins, it opens the door for other stalk and ear rot diseases that produce mycotoxins in corn-based feedstuffs, such as silage, grain, and stover, says MUExtension veterinary toxicologist Tim Evans. He recommends running a mycotoxin panel screening before feeding forage or grain infected with southern rust. Producers should also consider diluting with clean feedstuff and using other mycotoxin mitigation strategies as needed. The folks from MUExtension note that southern rust is spreading in Missouri. Here's what they say. Southern rust was found in 25 Missouri counties in the 2025 growing season. Now, we'll pause there for just a minute and point out that in our 4-county broadcast area, Warren County, Franklin County, St. Charles County, and West St. Louis County, there have been no documented cases of southern rust yet. However, in nearby Montgomery County, which borders Warren County, this July, 1 case of southern rust has been confirmed. And of course, just because no one from the University of Missouri has confirmed southern rust in Warren County, Franklin County, St. Charles County, or St. Louis County doesn't mean that it doesn't exist there. Let's go back quickly to the MU report. The wet start of the growing season contributed to southern rust being confirmed earlier than usual. Southern rust grows well in warm weather and high humidity. It's identified by orange to brown raised lesions on the top leaf surface and yellow flecking on the leaf underside. but no pustules, says MUExtension plant pathologist Mandy Bish. Open lesions leave an orange to brown mark on fingers when touched or rubbed. Now, we'll leave it there for the MU piece because I want to head over to the folks at the Stine Seedcast. As you know, that's one of our favorite information sources, certainly one of the best video podcasts you could ever find. The host of the Stine Seedcast, David Thompson, caught up with National Corn Product Manager Brian Hartman. Brian is from right outside the St. Louis area to discuss Southern rust. We'll pick up after the general description of Southern rust. David asked, what are the lines of defense? Here's what Brian had to say.
Well, the key is weekly scouting and identifying it quickly. That's the main thing. The other thing is not all fungicides are created equal. You're going to want to choose a fungicide with at least two modes of action. And that's what really differentiates us now from what we experienced in the late 90s is, back in the 90s, the infection came a lot later and we didn't have the options of fungicides like we do today. And if you think about fungicides, typically your protection on a fungicide, depending on which one you go with. And I don't necessarily have a preference on this platform, but, you might get 14 to 21 days protection. And if you think about the speed of reproduction on Southern rust, if it comes in at tassel, you have another 60 days to protect that plant until black layer. So it's kind of tricky on timing. It all really depends on when does it infect that plant, and then you got to start making some management decisions on how often do you have to spray.
The guys took a few minutes to discuss proper scouting, fungicide applications, modes of action, and then David asked, what are some of the effects of Southern rust? Here's what Brian had to say.
Well, there's a number of things. Anytime a disease is present in that field, you're risking yield, right? So we're seeing reduction in yield. We're seeing a reduction in test weight. Think about it. That ear leaf and canopy are responsible for the grain fill. And once that's disrupted, those things are going to be affected. There's a lot of cases where people are getting in there and they're harvesting and they're a little bit surprised the yield hit that they're taking and the test weight hit that they're taking as well.
David asked, if a grower did indeed have Southern rust this year, what are the takeaways that he could bring into next season? Here's what Brian had to say.
Plan for the unexpected, because if it's not Southern rust, it's going to be something else. But planning ahead, I look at when I look at a plan, a production plan, I would certainly at least have one application of fungicide budgeted in. And then I would just scout frequently. Every week we've got to be looking at this crop, just to do everything we can to protect it.
The guys discussed grain storage for a bit and then wrapped up with David asking the question, what are agronomists and seed companies and folks out in the field doing with this information? Brian had an answer.
Well, we are taking notes every day. We're taking notes on, what hybrids handled it or had a little bit more tolerance to Southern rust, as well as other diseases. We do that every year anyway. That's just part of the plan. But one of the things that stood out to me is, we're getting into this pattern of, planning on a fungicide application. It seems like there's, insect outbreaks this year that if you didn't have insect protection for earworm, there was a good outbreak of earworms that growers were having to spray insecticide for. One of the things that stands out to me is, and it's a benefit to some of our shorter stature hybrid offerings, that we don't talk about enough, is a number of these growers, they have their own sprayers. So they don't have to worry about scheduling a drone or a plane that could take weeks. You take a disease like Southern rust, when you have to plan ahead for a drone or a plane, which could take up to 2 weeks, then you're kind of working around the weather. every day you're waiting, you're losing yield potential. Where if you have your own ground rig, you can still spray some of our shorter stature hybrids, clear past tassel without any issues.
Hey, that's another ringing endorsement for short stature corn, wouldn't you say? David asked Brian where folks can go to learn more information. Here's Brian's answer.
Well, our good friend Google's got a lot of information out there, but I always start with the local extension. Iowa State does a great job. University of Illinois does a great job. Purdue does a great job. They all have information on southern rust. And, the one key thing that you see, because it is widespread, we saw southern rust clear up into South Dakota and Minnesota. I'm pretty sure they've never seen it before, but there's enough communication going on in between the two, all the different universities that they're pretty well versed on it. One thing that does come to mind as we talk about this and talking about fungicide and spraying is, there's varying opinions on drone, plane versus ground rigs, which is better. And when you think about a fungicide, typically they don't move within the plant a whole lot. So it all comes down to coverage and, more volume, the better penetrate down to that ear leaf, the better off you're going to be.
And once again, that was the folks from Stine Seed, the Stine Seedcast, hosted by David Thompson, with National Corn Product Manager Brian Hartman from the St. Louis area. You can find them on YouTube. Just search for Stine Seed. That's all the time we have today. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media. On Facebook, we're at Farm Show Radio. On Instagram, we're at Farm Show Radio. And on YouTube, you guessed it, Farm Show Radio. We'll see you again next Saturday at 10 a.m. You've been listening to The Farm Show. That's Farm and Ranch, Missouri on Westplex Talk 104.5.